Ladies and, whoa, that was a lot louder than I expected. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could briefly interrupt the many lovely conversations that you're having. My name is Mark Wallace. I'm the Chief Executive of Conservative Home. Thank you so much to all of you for coming to this, the Humanitarian Reception, hosted by Conservative Home in partnership with British Red Cross, a great organisation with whom I'm sure you'll all be very familiar. But I think it's really important that we get the opportunity to consider as a group and with our guest speakers this evening the importance of the work that they do and the nature of the policy and practical challenge of the times in which we live. We, sadly, live in times of multiple crises, and we've seen that they affect different aspects of life, from the personal, the financial, security, military, food, water, and beyond. We've also found, we can see vividly in the world today, how they cross international borders. The times at which people describe a problem somewhere in the UK as if it is standalone and has no impact on those overseas should be behind us. And there's certainly the times at which people talk about problems and crises overseas as if they are divorced from challenges here in the UK should also be banished to history. The fact is that even if someone does not have as their main priority in their life the suffering of someone else in another country, I think they ought to give weight to that. How many of the issues we deal with today that we've heard the Prime Minister speaking about, we hear the government speaking about, we see Parliament speaking about, and people around the country grappling to deal with, how many of these are truly standalone issues that you can divorce from the world in which we live, whether it's the crises of war, of energy, of climate change, and beyond? And I think that's one of the things we'd like to underscore this evening, is the importance of realising the connected nature of the world in which we live, the connected nature of the challenges here and abroad which arise from that, and therefore, by its nature, the connected nature of the solutions. Not just what politicians and policymakers and governments do, but what bodies like British Red Cross do, and of course the responders, the people who take action all around the world, do in practice to try and ameliorate those issues, and also to try and prevent the recurrence of more or still worse issues again in future. So we're very glad to be hosting this event this evening on this really important topic. It only falls to me to then introduce our first speaker, Zoe Abrams, the Executive Director of Communication and Engagement at British Red Cross. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. It really is great to be in Birmingham. A special thank you to our sponsors for tonight's event, the People's Postcode Lottery, who have been a vital partner to the British Red Cross since 2014 now. So far, £10 million worth of players' money has allowed us to reach communities with programmes tackling chronic hunger across Africa, supporting conflict-affected communities in the Middle East, and helping refugees and people seeking asylum to adapt to new lives in the UK. We are hugely grateful. I believe you have your own event on Tuesday. I encourage you all to go if you're still here. So, having thanked our sponsors, I wanted to start by saying how deeply saddened we were at the British Red Cross by the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. As our patron for 7 decades, the Queen showed enduring support for the work of the Red Cross here in the UK and around the world. The Queen took an active role as patron. She visited our services, spent time talking with people affected by disasters, and she gave personal donations to many of our appeals. She was a monarch with a hands-on, can-do attitude that many people can relate to. As some of you may know, she grew vegetables at Windsor during World War II and trained as a mechanic. And this spirit is something that we want to take forward to inspire everyone, whether in the humanitarian field, in Westminster, or within communities around the country. We want to work together to better prepare ahead of emergencies, be ready to respond when they do happen, and support people so they are less likely to reach a point of crisis. At the British Red Cross, our vision is a world where everyone gets the help they need in crisis. Tonight, we want to share that vision with you all and to outline how we hope to work together to overcome the major challenges of today and tomorrow, both at home and abroad. There are already so many examples of communities pulling together in so many ways, and I'll go on to those later. But before I go into detail about the positive impact we know is possible, we must acknowledge that we are working in an ever more challenging environment. Not only are we still living with a pandemic, but many people are now facing deep concerns over the cost of living, as you all know. We know that both in this country and overseas, the economic situation is already exacerbating the challenges faced by those we support, who are facing crisis in their lives, and it makes the work we do together all the more urgent. However, if we do pull together, we can make the changes we need to improve people's lives, prevent them from falling into crisis, and help them to recover when emergencies do happen. Which is why we are delighted to be joined this evening not only by the Right Honourable Robert Jenrick MP, Minister for State at the Department for Health and Social Care, but also the Right Honourable Dr Liam Fox, MP for North Somerset. We want to work with decision makers like our speakers to drive forward real change informed through our experiences as humanitarians responding to the crisis. But I wouldn't be doing my job if, before we heard from our speakers, for those of you who might not have worked with us before, I took this opportunity to give you a brief introduction to the Red Cross. So our mission is to help people in crisis, whoever or wherever they are. We are powered by over 14,000 volunteers in the UK alone, and they are embedded in local communities across the country. They make an enormous difference to people in crisis as they experience some of their darkest hours. As part of the largest global humanitarian network, we are able to support people in places with the greatest humanitarian needs. There are over 192 Red Cross, Red Crescent societies in the world, and during the pandemic, we estimate that our movement reached 1 in every 30 people across the globe. Many of the emergencies, as referenced, that we respond to span both the UK and overseas, and I'm going to give you 3 examples of that. Firstly, following the withdrawal from Afghanistan last year, alongside our Red Cross movement partners, we were able to support communities within Afghanistan in the immediate aftermath. For those who were able to leave, our psychosocial support team were ready in Dubai to support people throughout on their journey as part of the evacuation. And when they reached the UK, our emergency teams were on the ground in Brize Norton on the tarmac to receive people as they came off the planes. Today, our refugee support teams continue to work around the clock to support Afghan families during their time in hotels as they prepare to move into their new communities. The second example is everything the British Red Cross and the Red Cross in general has been doing in the Ukraine following the escalation of conflict there earlier this year. We've been supporting the Ukrainian Red Cross to scale up its operations in country, helping their emergency response teams with evacuations and assisting people whose homes have been destroyed. Across Europe, the Red Cross movement is supporting millions of Ukrainian people who have had to leave their homes to cross into neighbouring countries. Here in the UK, we have supported 10,000 families with emergency financial support and to reconnect with their families so that they can be in contact again with people they may have lost as they fled, which is very common for people on the migration trail. The third example I'm going to give you proves once again how we live in an interconnected world. As you will no doubt be aware, the crisis in Ukraine has caused a global food and fuel crisis, with prices rising everywhere, which alongside climate-related extreme weather such as droughts, is contributing to plunging parts of Africa into a severe and enduring food crisis. Many countries across the region are grappling with the worst crisis in decades, with no less than 22 million people in the Horn of Africa now on the brink of starvation. Red Cross teams are working across the ground on the continent, supporting communities who've been hit hardest. We are providing water, food, immediate financial help, nutrition services and healthcare. We're also working with a longer-term view to help people to adapt to the changing climate, build their long-term resilience and learn vital skills for the future, but more still needs to be done. In this challenging environment, we believe it is more crucial than ever that aid is allocated where and how it will be most effective and where the needs are greatest. And where possible, this funding should be delivered through local actors who are often the first to respond and who really understand the needs of their communities. So having said all that, it may surprise you to hear that the majority of the work the British Red Cross does actually takes place right here in our own country with British-born people. And whilst most of you will know the Red Cross for our work overseas, the fact is that here in the UK, we respond to an emergency every 4 hours. We are there to help run rest centres and provide support during big emergencies, and you may have seen the British Red Cross in action after tragedies such as the Grenfell Tower fire in London and the Manchester Arena bombing. We're also there for the smaller emergencies. We work with fire brigades in many areas, accompanying them to their house fires, our vehicle packed with clothing, food, pet supplies, anything people might need when they recover from the horror of seeing their home go up in flames. And we've learned so much from decades of responding to emergencies that we're now using that insight to help communities prevent or reduce the impact of emergencies. We might not be able to stop the emergency happening in the first place, but what if we could change things so that people could reduce the level of harm they experience, recover more quickly, and be more resilient in future? Beyond emergencies, the British Red Cross also has a long-standing partnership with the NHS. This goes right back to before the NHS was even formed, when the Red Cross actually ran the blood service in this country, did you know? So every year we provide support to hundreds of thousands of people. We provide ambulance support, we take patients to and from hospital, and we help people live independently in their own homes and communities. One of our services works with a hospital on the south coast of England, helping people who make repeat visits to A&E, people who are genuinely ill, at crisis point, but also have other challenges in their lives. One older gentleman we worked with had attended A&E 300 times in a year. Again, he was unwell and he needed help, but with support from our staff, we discovered the underlying factors that were affecting his life and his health. He had no food, no water, no connections to his family nor his community. He was entitled to benefits but needed support to access them. We helped him to do that. We helped him to get his boiler fixed. We built up a relationship of trust. We found others in the community who could help him too, and we helped them to get the diagnosis and the medical support he needed. So we helped take some of the pressure off the A&E department, because despite men like this being only 1% of the people who come to A&Es, they constitute 26% of total hospital admissions. So if we can tackle this, we can reduce the 2.5 billion of individuals like this who are frequenting hospital and GPs every year. Finally, the final area I wanted to talk about was, very briefly, and then I will hand over, was our work with refugees and asylum, because the British Red Cross is also the largest independent provider in the UK of support to people who have fled war, violence and persecution in other countries. We offer emergency services to help refugees, including one-to-one support and casework, special services for children and families, and we help to reunite families. We hope to work with government towards a reformed, effective, efficient and fair asylum system that creates safe routes to find safety in the UK. A system where decisions are made quickly as possible and are right the first time. And while people are waiting for a decision, they receive compassionate support that reflects the trauma they've been through. Because of the scale of our work with refugees and people seeking asylum, we have a deep understanding of the system and the small changes that would make a difference. For example, what a huge difference it would make if women making a claim were no longer interviewed by a male asylum interviewer when they're making disclosures of rape and sexual assault. So, you've heard the huge breadth of what the British Red Cross does in the UK and overseas, and I hope that some of what I've said has inspired you. And so what we want to do is invite you to join the British Red Cross movement. Look for ways to volunteer with us. Support us locally in your local community. Reach out to friends and family who might be lonely. That's doing the British Red Cross's work without ever being actually involved with us or our logo. Find ways to welcome newly arrived refugees into your community. Even learn a first aid skill that could save a life. And if you're certainly 2 MPs in this room, if you are an MP, please do find out more about how we can support your work in Parliament to move forward in this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And I'd reiterate that actually in terms of, say, first aid skills. When my wife was expecting our first child, we went on an infant first aid course provided by the British Red Cross. which led directly to saving him from what might otherwise have been a life-threatening situation. So I can't recommend those services enough. Now, as Zoe just talked about, and as I mentioned, we're here to talk about issues that affect home and overseas. And our first political speaker is Robert Jenrick, been known to many of you, the Minister of State for Health and Social Care. Please give him a warm welcome.
Well, good evening, everybody. And first of all, thank you to Conservative Home and to Mark for hosting this. Ever since the beginning of Conservative Home as a website and an organisation, it's always placed compassionate conservatism at the heart of our mission. It's always believed that we as Conservatives have a role in supporting the most vulnerable in society amongst our values. And the fact that Conservative Home has chosen to hold this event tonight and that you've come here to support it shows that once again. Thank you to Zoe and to the British Red Cross for your role this evening and for all the work that you do. And you set that out brilliantly today. You have, as you said, 14 million volunteers around the world in 192 countries, but you have 14,000 here in the UK, and your work has always begun at home and then reached outwards. And in many different ways, the British Red Cross is supporting people, the most vulnerable in society, and communities in their hour of need across our country. And so thank you to you and to everyone who supports the British Red Cross. We really do appreciate it. I'm here really on behalf of the government and the Conservative Party to thank all of the voluntary groups who are here represented at the conference in Birmingham, and to thank you for your engagement with the Conservative Party, for the work that you do, and to say to you that we believe strongly in the power of public service, of the charitable and voluntary community in the UK. And we've seen that so vividly in recent years. As Community Secretary, I think back to the beginning of the pandemic, and the incredible way in which communities came together, aided by charities and voluntary sectors across the United Kingdom. 1 million people signed up in a matter of days to be NHS volunteers. We created the Shielding programme that at one point supported millions of people and delivered 8 million food boxes to people's doorsteps. The state alone could never have taken on these challenges and done them so efficiently and so compassionately. And so it was the role of volunteers and organisations like the British Red Cross that really made that happen. And that's why it's so important that we work with you as a government and we ensure that you feel valued and engaged with by the Conservative Party. As Zoe said, one of the great challenges we face now, and certainly as we approach the winter, is the NHS and social care, which I think faces perhaps its most challenging winter ever. And it will need not just the dedication of its brilliant workforce, and we've come to expect that, and we know that the workforce is very challenged, but it will also need the hundreds of thousands of volunteers and supporters across the country that play a vital role in supporting it. Zoe mentioned some of those statistics, like the fact that a tiny number of people, both the young and the frail elderly, account for such a huge proportion of those ending up in our A&Es. And organisations like the British Red Cross can help us to get the NHS through this challenging winter by going the extra mile. I saw that earlier, last week when I went to visit the St John's ambulance volunteers, 2,000 of them who helped during the Queen's funeral. And those people supported thousands of individuals in central London who would otherwise have had to call upon the very stretched resources of the NHS. We as a government want to go further and to harness the good work of those organisations and charities. The Health Secretary has spoken of creating a new auxiliary service, building on first responders, building on St John's Ambulance, and trying to encourage more people to give up their time and to help us to build capacity in the NHS. Zoe also mentioned the work that she and her organisation has done around refugees. And I do think that this government has seen the best of the British public when we created schemes like Homes for Ukraine. Of course, it had a bumpy start, and there were people who found that frustrating. But tens of thousands of British people came forward and offered Ukrainian families into their homes. And that, I think, should give us all great heart, great pride in our country. My family was one of those. It was one of the most rewarding experiences that we've had as a family in many, many years. We loved having a Ukrainian family in our home, and I hope that if you haven't done that, you might consider doing it in the future, because the 6-month period is coming to an end, and we will need thousands more families to come forwards this autumn and take on those families who might need a new home in your community. And the fact that voluntary organisations help to do that really shows the value that you play. And at the heart of that policy was a belief that it shouldn't and can't always be the state that steps up. It can also be us as individuals and families taking responsibility, but also communities coming together. And sometimes that can be better than getting big state organisations to make the difference. So thank you very much for what you've done in the past. I really appreciate it. And I do believe that there's a huge role for community groups and individuals in the months and years to come. And I hope that you will see in the approach that Therese Coffey, the new Health Secretary, and I take, that we will view trying to ensure that the NHS gets through these difficult periods, and the long shadow cast by COVID upon it will be a national endeavour, a partnership between government and the NHS, volunteers and voluntary organisations, and that will be the only way in which we can place it on a sustainable footing for the future and ensure that it really delivers for each and every one of us in our daily lives, as it has done in the past. With that, I shall hand over to my friend Dr. Liam Fox. It's always a pleasure to be his warm-up act. And Liam is going to, I believe, say something more about the Red Cross and about the international role of humanitarian organisations and our commitment as a government and as a party to them. But thank you once again for coming here today and for everything that you do. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Minister, for representing the government here tonight and for giving that perspective. I promised earlier perspectives on home and abroad, ladies and gentlemen. Our final speaker, Liam Fox, will again be known, I'm sure, to all of you. He is, of course, by profession a medical doctor. We'll have his own perspective on that too, but has also been a prominent voice within Conservatism on foreign policy and international affairs for many years, a former Secretary of State for Defence and for International Trade, and a consistent voice throughout his career for a country that has a realistic and pragmatic approach to identifying, preventing, and then responding where necessary to crises around the world, and a voice for stability in a turbulent world. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Liam Fox.
It's very nice, but a touch irritating when someone gives an introduction that basically says everything you were going to say. But thank you very much, Mark. Thanks to Conhome. Thank you, Zoe, for setting out so clearly what the Red Cross does. And the reason that I wanted to come and speak very briefly tonight was really a much more personal view, which is a big thank you to the Red Cross in all the elements that I've done in my life when I was a doctor, when I was a surgeon with St. John's Ambulance and working with the Red Cross and setting the exams and all the things that need to be done. And in my time as a Foreign Office Minister, dealing with the humanitarian elements when I worked on that side of the Foreign Office, and then, of course, in defence, seeing the results of conflict and what that can actually mean and how we can do so much to help, and then again in trade. And really what I wanted to say was, first of all, thank you. Secondly, to highlight some of the problems we have, which I hope may be tinged also with hope. I think that we could learn a great deal in government, in the processes of government, from organisations like the Red Cross and how they are able seamlessly to move from one challenge to another and don't seem to suffer from the silo mentality that seems to afflict Whitehall and government on far too many occasions. And I think there's a great deal that we can do, more than just thanking them, is actually to learn from them and to build their experiences into our worldview and into our foreign policy, our development policy, even our trade policy, because we need to be able to join our dots as successfully as they join their dots. And I'll give you just two examples of that. First is that 40% of all the people who live on our planet today get their drinking water from a river that arises on the Tibetan plateau. Just think about it. 4 in 10 people, humans today, are utterly dependent on China releasing water from the Tibetan plateau. The Indus, Brahmaputra, Ganges, Mekong, Yellow, and Yangtze rivers. And for those who are still deluded, the Chinese are not the slightest bit bothered about the Dalai Lama. Okay, that's Richard Gere's perspective on the world. The Chinese are worried about water as a strategic resource, and the Chinese will build more dams in the next 5 years than have been built in humankind in our history. And when you combine that, the huge increase in the population, the change in climate, which is seeing increasing meltwater, glacial meltwater, every year at the present time, we'll see more floods in Pakistan, we'll see more floods in Bangladesh in the years ahead, until we get to the point where those glaciers are no longer there. And we will go from floods and plenty to drought, and it will happen quickly. And you combine that with the mass migration that's occurring because of other political conflicts, and you can start to see where we need to be able to join our dots together. And I've seen in all the jobs I've done why we're behind the curve in doing that, and why we can look to big organizations, big international organizations like the Red Cross, to give us assistance in how to shape our policy. I don't believe that we marry properly in the United Kingdom, under really any government, our trade policy, our development policy, our foreign policy, all together in a way that we should. And I'll give you my second tiny example from my time as Trade Secretary, which might not seem to be something that's automatically relevant. But at the end of the financial crash, in the first quarter of 2009, right, only 0.7%, less than 1% of all the goods being imported into the G20 were covered by either a tariff or a non-tariff barrier. A big open trading environment, great for developing countries. Roll that forward to the first quarter of 2020, that 0.7% had become 10.3%. In other words, the world's richest countries, including us, are putting increasing barriers to developing countries to be able to trade their way out of poverty in a sustainable way. There will be a price to be paid for that, because either we accept that we're creating a world with equal access to opportunity, or in a world where every young African's got a mobile phone and can see what prosperity looks like, we will either see more mass migration or more political radicalization. We have got to learn to join the dots. As Mark said at the beginning, we're getting to the point where there is no longer an over there, because whatever is over there, whether that's in public health or security or finance, the problems that are over there today will be over here tomorrow in the world in which we live. We've got to start to change how we think about our politics, how we think about the world around us. It is an enormous challenge, and we might be dispirited from thinking that the challenges themselves are too great. But when I look at organizations like the Red Cross, including the International Committee, I can see how it is possible to actually bring all those elements, those disparate elements together in a way that makes sense. And I pray that we will listen to what they have done. We will understand the challenges that they are telling us that they are facing today. We can together look at the evidence about the changes of the world around us, and we can actually make a much better crack of dealing with these global problems in the future than we've often done to date. It's an enormous challenge, I recognize that, but the prize for future generations is almost beyond measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liam. I think acutely picked out there in your remarks is the fact that, of course, we live in difficult times. And of course, there are many, many challenges in front of us now. There will be others ahead. But exactly as Zoe pointed out, that there is a message of hope here. People can make a difference to the world around them. We know this because people already are making a difference to the world around them. So I hope you'll all take the opportunity to enjoy the rest of the evening. I think we're here till 9 o'clock. Zoe and some of her Red Cross colleagues are with us throughout, so do take the opportunity to pick their brains on how you might help. And thank you very much for joining us. Good night.